morning, good morning. Yes, it's still morning. Good morning. I am so honored. I can take these off, I think. I'm so honored to be here with you guys. Give yourselves, look, I want to commend you guys this month, this Black History Month, and your celebration has been amazing and awesome. I've watched it online. Give yourselves a hand. Yay! I am so honored and glad to be here. I'm doing the fourth Sundays this year here at church, and I'm so excited and honored to be able to come and share with you as we close out this Black History Month. And it is so exciting to me because sometimes I think that we get this whole thing all a little confused. And so I want to come in here and I want to use maybe, I don't know if it's a proper way of saying this, but sometimes I think about the Matrix. I'm just touching on this for just a second, y'all, because I know a lot of people didn't watch the Matrix. Some people are not Matrix fans. I don't know how that's possible. But there's this moment in the Matrix when Neo realizes that he's the one, and he runs and he jumps into Dr. Smith or Mr. Smith, right? And he jumps in and he busts open. And so sometimes I have that energy, like I want to run and I want to fling myself at you and jump into you so you can change your minds about the way you see the world. But alas, there is only one me. And so I can't necessarily do that with everybody, but what I can do is share the lensing that I have about this whole thing. And so when I think about Black history and Black History Month, and I think about this entire thing that we've gone through, I like to bring a level of awareness to it that some folks might not have. You see, through Black history, a lot of times what we talk about is this idea of the struggles that people of color have gone through when we talk about this whole thing. And I encountered this wonderful man, Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, who is a scholar out of Ghana. And he talked about, and this is something that has always intrigued me. Some years ago, I remember watching, I'm going to tell you how long ago it was. It was back, I think, at the millennial, at the change into 1999 into 2000. And there was this thing where in the Chinese parade and in the New Year, there was a person that I saw, and on one side of his body, there was this serious person, and on the other side, there was a trickster. And so I was always intrigued about this trickster and kind of wanted to like pursue it a little bit, to look into it. And then Dr. Akomolafe started talking about the trickster god Esau. I do believe that was his name, or was it Oshun? Whichever one it was, he started talking about it because a lot of times he says that the thing that we think happens is really a trick in order to accomplish another goal. Just bear with me for a minute. When he talked about this idea about where the world, where people were going in their thoughts and their ideology. And he says that oftentimes there is this need for us to have a reset. And so he says, and part of this idea of the reset means that we've got to figure out a vehicle for making this reset happen. So he said, and I thought this was really interesting. He said that God has been always and forever active. Now we know that, right? We know that in all, through all, as all, at all times, God has been active. And so he says that we have this notion that somehow God was absent during the Middle Passage and the captivity of people. He says, but wonder if we turn that on its head. And we realize that the allness and the power of God has never been absent or inactive, but rather present through that. And that it traveled, whether it was the Middle Passage or wherever, in the belly of the ships, along with the people who were being entrapped, or so we thought, traveled right here with us for a purpose and with a plan. The purpose, he said, was not so we can get focused in on the injustices that happened to us, but because the world needed saving. Is that not a tripped out way of looking at that? So when I think about this, I think about it in terms of, we could talk about so many different things, right? But there's this idea of colonization. We get caught up in money, y'all. If we haven't really thought about the values that we have, then we're really not thinking. If we don't look at what it has meant to capitalism and how we put profit over people, if we haven't thought about it in the terms of, and this is not separate from what Jesus talked about, right? This is not separate from the teachings and the values that we've been told and espoused that we ought to have. And so if we don't look at that and try to figure out in the midst of what is going on, why we may be here in this particular place, there was a reset that was needed. And who better to sin than me? And who better to sin? I tell you, when I start looking at the vibrancy, as I start looking at the energy of what people of color have brought, I can't help but think that we're the Kool-Aid in the water. We sort of give it flavor. I don't know about y'all. I can speak for me, right? But you say interesting. I'm the flavoring, right? And so when we start thinking about it from a different perception, what I see is that there has been some interesting things that have come up. You see, when we look at the media and television and what it has managed to do, it has managed to tell you that you're not good enough unless you got a Lincoln. And people actually believe it. Sorry, Alan. He buys one every other year, just whatever. But people come with these assumptions that it's the things, that it's the money, that it's the position, that it is this idea that I can rule the world. We see it all the time, you know, whether we're looking in the comic strips or whether we're looking in the television stuff, this idea that somehow what we own makes us better. We come with this idea of separation. We come with these ideas about, let me have the bigger house, let me have bigger this, bigger that, better this, better that, as if that is what makes us worthy or who we are. And so when we start to believe the lies, and I know some people we used to have this thing where people ran around and they looked at you and wanted to call you out as if to want what I want for myself and for another was somehow a bad concept or a bad idea. But if we lived in a world that worked for everybody, I mean, if you think about it, if we lived in a world that works for everybody, then what we would do is not be sitting here thinking about me and mine, but rather how we all can enjoy this thing, this world, this country that we live in. And so when I think about this perception that this could all be a part of a plan for our good and for our elevation. When I think about it from a different shift, I can't help but think, I'm not a victim here. I'm on purpose. I am on purpose. And that I know that I'm on purpose puts me in a different situation. I can even look at people when they think that they have somehow done something. I can look and think, man, I'm here because I'm supposed to be. I'm speaking because I'm supposed to. I'm doing what I do because I'm supposed to. And each and every one of us, sometimes we're doing what it is that we're supposed to do, thinking that we made a choice to do it, not recognizing that it's this all God in the midst of thee that does the work through you. You were a vehicle. And the fact that we think that it's something else means that you've been tricked, bamboozled. And so now what we need to do is get in alignment with the truth. Did you not know that you're loved? Did you not know that this was all a part of a plan? And so we stop walking around in this mentality that says that I'm a victim of the world I see. That's a Course in Miracles thing. I am not a victim of the world I see. All of this is planned. All of this is on purpose. And when I recognize the on-purposeness of it, then I can shift my perception about it. But what we need to do is to go around, and I tell you, it's really interesting because I gotta let me take a. Yeah, it's so funny to me. Because sometimes we don't want to hear this from other people, right? We can't go up to somebody and say, ha, you've been tricked, right? Because they don't necessarily want to hear it from you in that way. I was listening to these guys on this talk show that were doing this little thing, and they said, this is what they said. Okay, this was funny to me. He says, I don't like those eyelashes on women. He was like, those big eyelashes. He was like, I don't like those. And he says, but you know what I found out is, he says that you can't tell a woman that's wearing them that you don't like them. He's like, that does not work out well. So I tell you, don't go up to a black person and say, you've been tricked, right? Because that don't go too well, right? But what it is that we do is that we have a shift of perception in our own minds about what is going on. We have a shift in perception. If I could say that when I walk into a room, I recognize that I'm the Kool-Aid that goes in the water that's responsible for the flavoring, it causes me to show up different, right? I don't go up to people and say, hey, I'm the Kool-Aid. I just be the Kool-Aid. And so you all have the option that if you know that you are love, if you know that you are responsible for bringing love into the room, you don't have to go in there and say, I am love and I am here, right? You just go and be that which you are. And so a lot of times people have such a struggle with this. Like, and the moment, here's the other thing. The moment that we enter into the struggle, we know that we're off point. We know that we're off the mark. It's like, can you imagine the sun trying to fight its way into a room or something like that? It just does what it does. If its job is to illumine, it just illumines. It's no struggle. There is nothing to fight up against. And the moment you start fighting, you recognize, man, I must go back and I must sit and get myself straight first. The first job, it says in the Course in Miracles, the first job as a miracle worker is to first accept the miracle for yourself. So now how do we do that? And so a lot of times when we're challenged, sometimes that's the moment we need to take that breath As I breathe in, I'm breathing in air that you just exhaled. I may think I'm a body, but we're all one. Actually, this air is active, whether we see it or not. There is a process that is going on. In this inhalation and this exhalation, there is nothing that separates me from you except for my idea that we are somehow separate. I came here for you, and you came here for me. This is a oneness, and sometimes we get it confused. Y'all, God is so good. And sometimes we just don't recognize it, right? In the midst of what I'm going through, in the midst of the challenge, in the midst of all that I see, God is good. And even when I can't see it, what I'm doing is I'm holding out and I'm saying, I'm waiting for the correction. Because I know that the correction is there. Oh my gosh. You remember the story of, what is that? It was the family of ducks that had that little ugly duckling in the midst of them, right? Remember the story of the ugly duckling? And that ugly duckling was somehow thinking that something was wrong with it. And it's hanging out with these other ducks and wondering what the heck, you know? Everybody is, and then all of a sudden, what it realized after it grew up was that it was a swan. And sometimes we're still walking around or swimming around in the world where we think that we're the ugly ducklings. I used to be the ugly duckling of my family. If you could believe it or not. I mean, you doubt it. No, I really was. I really was. And I was that wayward child that, I thought that they had to apologize for, The teachers, when I would go to school, they would look at me like, you're a bishop? Like, what happened to you? I was not the good kid, not the smart kid, not the talented kid. As a matter of fact, I'm still the big mouth kid, right? The one that causes the issues and the trouble, but it's okay. I realized that one day I'm still in the same family and they still love me. But what I realized was that I just, I had misperceived all of this stuff. You see, when we're younger, we don't recognize what it is, the gifting that's coming through us. And sometimes we take that gift and we shove it down deep. Sometimes we take that gift and we don't even want to acknowledge that we have a gift because the gift doesn't fit right. I mean, my sister, she was a singer and she played the flute and she was this, went to Barbizon and she was this and that and all of that other stuff. And all my brothers had talent and played sports and, my brothers back there, my dad was just so proud of them. And here I was, me, just plain old me. But here's the thing, because I'm still resistant. I'm still ornery. I'm still that same girl. But who didn't know that this was going to turn into a message, a way of life, right? And sometimes what we don't recognize is that the very gift that we're sitting there and we're having problems with is the very gift that is supposed to come through us. When you ask yourself, what is my gifting? Maybe it was your curse as a kid. I don't know, because I was pretty, bad. I was pretty bad, but now my badness is good. You see how that flips? So what is it that you have thrown away? What gifting have you put to the side and thought that it's not enough? What are you judging against yourself? They say that our gifts make room for us. But if we're still shoving them in the closet, if we're still like repressing them, maybe we need to redefine how we see it. Are you the flavoring that's needed in the room? Are you Kool-Aid? Do you have something to give? And it ought to be a sin. I love in The Color Purple how Seeley, I think, who was it, said, it ought to be a sin to walk past the color purple and not know it. It ought to be a sin not to breathe into and live into your fullness. Sure. Okay, thank you. I knew somebody would know. But we have got to live into our fullness and see what that means. So if we could shift our mindset from the victim mode into one of knowing the rightness for the moment, to seeing that we are not here in a space where we are supposed to be the outcast, but rather we've been taught about this idea of being the consciousness of a nation. So when we would hear Dr. Martin Luther King speak, when we would hear the talks from, whether it was, we could go through and talk about all the people from Marcus Garvey all the way up to Martin Luther King, to the people who were talking today. We could go through all of those. Whatever it is, the concept is, if we're talking even about Malcolm X, if we talk about, it's the consciousness that we are trying to root into. It's the consciousness. And when we think about the messages are not so much like this idea about, who's better and who's not, and what you've done and what not. This thing, Dr. Akomolafe calls it this idea about whiteness. He says whiteness is not like a person, but it's an ideology that is caught up in the colonization of people. This idea that I'm going to use you for my own ends, my own means. And so what that does is it causes us to have this thoughts of separation one from the other. But he says that blackness comes in as the answer to put the flavoring in that so that we see that it's not about the exploitation of one another, but rather about the connection, all of us in this together. So we shift around our perception and realize that we have all been victims of this type of mentality. It's not just something that has happened to black folks. It's happened to women folks. It's happened to people of color throughout the world. This domination, this exploitation, it has happened to all of us in some degree. And so the thing is to make the correction within ourselves. What would love say do here? How would love be? What would love do in this situation? And when we begin to make that correction, we move closer to a world that works for everybody. I love that, when we stop seeing each other as guilty of something and rather see ourselves as united together, what can we all do? What can we each do in order to change that? What can we do to honor a new awareness about how we show up in the world? That's the real challenge. And so a lot of times, one of the things that I do, y'all, I think I've probably mentioned this all the time because it's one of my spiritual practices, that when I drive down the street, maybe got my music on and everything, but I drive down the street and I look and I say, oh, there's God, and there's God, and there's God. Oh, and there's God. And sometimes it's a challenge to say there's God, right? Because you might see any old thing, right? Oh, my goodness. Sometimes it is a challenge. But that's why it's a spiritual exercise. Because there too is God. Everywhere I look, I see God. And so if we could, just change around, and even when they don't know it, right? It's not that whether or not they know it, it's that I know it that makes a difference. Course in Miracles tells me that when my mind is corrected, so too are those around me. I'm going to be the correction. I'm the Kool-Aid in your water. That's what I got for you today. Amen.